Looks like we're getting very close on the shutdown. We'll never agree to give any substantial money or any money to really prisoners, illegals that come into our country. And I think the Democrats understand that. And it looks like we're getting close to the shutdown ending. You'll know very soon. Thank you very much.
So this is a big government shutdown update for you, because it does appear that perhaps the Democrat temper tantrum could be over, at least for now. I'm sure they're going to go right back to this very soon. But as it currently stands, Chuck Schumer is effectively caving, and enough Democrat votes do exist to reopen the government. At least that is what the mainstream media is reporting. But notably, they're moving forward on a deal here that does not include the Obamacare tax credits or any free healthcare for illegal aliens. Basically, if you remember, Democrats shut down the government saying you have to fund Obamacare, you have to restore Medicaid, you have to bring back the federal workers, all this stuff. And then later on, they really pivoted to make it just about Obamacare, right? But in the end, after saying for months, we will not vote for any budget or continuing resolution that does not involve Obamacare, guess what the Democrats apparently are now doing? Voting for a continuing resolution that doesn't include Obamacare. In other words, after 40 plus days of a government shutdown, Chuck Schumer has effectively gotten none of what he wanted. What a pathetic performance. What an absolute loser. And needless to say, the far left is not happy with him. You have Bernie Sanders and Kyle Kulinski saying, Chuck Schumer caved. How could this happen? What is going on? So it's a pretty hysterical situation. But again, we will give you this vital update on the government shutdown in today's video. And it could finally be over. First though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is not only the best way to support our work, but it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And with that said, so here is the reporting from ABC News. Now, take this as you will, because I would not be surprised if the progressive backlash against Schumer and the establishment leadership basically makes them do a 180 and go back to shutting down the government. Because if we're to be honest with ourselves, I think there were many different points here where Schumer thought about maybe, hey, you know, let's reopen the government, let's end this. But the pressure nonstop from the far left would not end, right? It's worth noting that the progressive lunatics effectively run the Democrat Party. Look at Zoran Mamdani, look at all the primary threats and all this stuff, and, you know, that is the case. But hey, maybe they're going to give. I don't know. We'll find out. But this is what ABC News is saying. So the Senate is angling to take a key test vote as early as Sunday night on a plan that would reopen the government. The vote would be a big test gauge whether enough Democrats would vote with Republicans to break the impasse, even though they would not get an extension of Obamacare subsidies that expire at the end of the year, which they have been holding out for through the 40-day shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. And again, if this does end up happening, that is just hilarious. Longest shutdown in history, Democrats got effectively nothing out of all of it.
That there could be a vote later tonight. They are unsure exactly what they would be voting on, but we are hearing that Republicans are trying to push through a bill to open the government. This would be a temporary spending bill. But as far as we're hearing, it does not include any of the Democrats' health care demands. So it's unclear if it's going to get enough of that Democratic support. As we've been talking about, this gridlock has lasted for these 40 days as Democrats have remained firm on their demand for these healthcare tax credits to be extended so premiums don't skyrocket for millions of Americans. Republicans have been demanding that Democrats reopen the government first and then they'll talk. So unclear if this stalemate is going to move, but senators are in fact working through the weekend. So we'll just have to wait and see tonight if there's any change.
Well, again, as we've been trying to tell you, it is those very Obamacare tax credits that are the very reason why Americans' healthcare premiums have gone up to begin with. And on that note, I don't know, who knows? It could be the case. Maybe we're reading too much into it. But the day after Trump announces an alternative plan on Obamacare, which is actually better, he basically wants to create an off-ramp for the subsidies for the big insurance companies by temporarily next year putting that money in the hands of Americans, or at least like HSA style accounts for the Americans who receive the Obamacare tax credits that would both, right, transition us off the failed Obamacare corporate socialism system, which long term would lower prices without making the immediate response like a shock to the system, essentially. So that way, again, people can have the off ramp, they can have the slow transition there. And I don't know, maybe that's something where the Democrats were like, oh, shoot, finally, Republicans have gotten smart on the healthcare question. You know, instead of letting Democrats beat them by 20 points on this issue, how about actually expose the fact that it is Obamacare and liberal healthcare policies that have ruined healthcare to begin with, right? So I don't know, could be a factor, could not, we don't know. It could also be just the case that, well, who knows, maybe some of these senators themselves want to fly home for Thanksgiving, for instance. And as I brought up, like, that's the biggest issue right now with the government shutdown. You have flights getting canceled across the country. If it goes into Christmas, that's going to be another problem for Americans. You know, the skies are more dangerous. Flights are getting canceled. That's, you know, what I would say, frankly, should be the number one priority right now. And this is all because what? Because the Democrats in Washington want to throw a temper tantrum. So therefore, millions of Americans don't get Thanksgiving. You know, so I don't know. Maybe that's another motivating factor here. Nonetheless, still pretty despicable what they did on many levels. They use it to try to win an election. They, you know, screwed over a bunch of their own people, ironically. And then, you know, obviously everything going on right now, you can't find a flight. Flights are expensive. It's a big mess. But that said, so multiple Senate sources told ABC News' Jonathan Karl that the bill would extend funding to January 31st, as well as provide funding for the remainder of the fiscal year to other agencies like the Department of Agriculture to pay for SNAP benefits and the Department of Veterans Affairs. By the way, here is the entire proposal. And by the way, it's backed by Trump. So it would fund the government through January 31st. There is a promise to vote on the ACA subsidies in December. So, you know, Democrats, you can at least try to see where the actual opinion is on that, right? But it's not going to be included in the continuing resolution. So you're not allowed to hold the government hostage over your beloved failed Obamacare system. It would reverse the mass layoffs of federal workers since October 1st, provide a full year of funding for Veterans Affairs, and provide a full year of funding for SNAP. Now, I got to be completely honest with you. I do not love all aspects of this negotiated compromise, right? The SNAP program, for instance, I think we have learned in the course of this government shutdown, there is rampant fraud and grifting going on here. Arguably, maybe even the majority of SNAP recipients, as well as a bunch of non-citizens receiving it through their household and all that. I would like to see genuine reform made there, right? You know, the same is true with the federal workers. Why should they be allowed to be brought back? We as conservatives have wanted to shrink the federal workforce, right? We support DOGE. Why are you giving that back to the Democrats? So I'm not a fan of that. I'm also not a fan of how the shutdown only is stopped until January 31st, because what's stopping Democrats from shutting it down again, right? You're only going to fund the government for like 2 months, right? You're just kicking the can down the road for this problem. That said, you know, I think ultimately it's still hard not to say that Republicans won the greater situation here, because they shut down the government for Obamacare. What Republicans were about to do, and essentially they're doing now, is, hey, reopen or fund the government as normal. So that would include SNAP benefits, that includes the federal workers. It was never part of the original plan to do it. So yeah, from an objective standpoint, this is still the Republicans winning. I wouldn't necessarily say they caved. It's just something that, you know, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of for those very obvious reasons. I mean, obviously funding the VA is definitely fine. You know, I have no problem with that. But again, okay, so there you essentially have it. Now, a senior Democrat senator told ABC's Karl that there will be more than enough Democrat voters to pass this, or votes to pass this, although a majority of Democrats, including most of the leadership, will likely vote against it. And so here is actually, this is exactly how I predicted, if you guys remember, the shutdown would end. So Schumer wants to end it ultimately because, you know, he probably knows it's just creating a gigantic mess. But because of Bernie Sanders, because of AOC, because of Zoran Mondani and all these progressives who are trying to primary him in 2028, he doesn't want to look like the dirt is on his hands. So he's probably going to vote against it, but then there's going to be this small coalition of like swing state, purple state senators who are like, okay, we'll vote to reopen the government And it's their fault, right? Just like how under Biden's presidency, it was all, if you guys don't know this, it was all actually basically kayfabe, whether it was Kirsten Sinema, Joe Manchin voting against like the progressive legislation. They blame, those guys are actually the scapegoat, right? This is basically how the Senate works. By the way, you wonder why neither party thus far has gotten rid of the filibuster and why the Republicans right now refuse to get rid of it. This is why, because ultimately all the establishment uniparty actors in the U.S. Senate basically want to have an excuse to get nothing done, but they want to look like fighters for their party. And so, I'm sure Kirsten Gillibrand and people like that will probably be the scapegoat here. Fetterman already has been that. I don't know what other 5 votes they'll find, but it is the case. Apparently, they're reporting at least 10.
But you've had a coalition of 3 other senators who caucus with the Democrats who voted with the Republicans throughout the way here. And we've just gotten this bit of information in the past few minutes that, part and parcel that was central to getting this deal were 3 former New England governors. They are all senators now. You have Jeanne Shaheen, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire, Maggie Hassan, the Democratic senator from New Hampshire as well, and Angus King, the independent from Maine, who caucuses with the Democrats. They say that they have gotten some major concessions in this deal. This would reverse the federal RIFs. Also, SNAP money would be back in, and so they're willing to support that deal. So you see how that coalition of Democrats is growing. And here's the other issue. You have a split in the Democratic caucus. The Senate Democrats have been meeting behind closed doors for about an hour and a half, 2 hours now, and there's a lot of division there. There are some Democrats who are going to come out and support this test vote, and the others are going to rage at them. Hakeem Jeffries, who's the Democratic leader, just put out a statement a few minutes ago. He said that this fight is not over in the House of Representatives for the Democrats. You had critical words from Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont, about what the Democrats were doing here because they didn't get anything on health care. Remember, this is why Democrats were not voting to fund the government. They wanted an agreement on health care. Greg Kazar, who is a Democrat from Texas, and he chairs the Progressive Caucus in the House of Representatives, he called this a betrayal. So we're probably going to have this test vote sometime in the next couple of hours, and then the question is just how fast they can get it through the Senate. Does that come later tonight? Does it come in the overnight? Is this more of a Monday or Tuesday project? Tommy?
So Democrats would get nothing on health care, besides a promise that the Senate would vote on extending Affordable Care Act subsidies before the end of the year. Essentially, what Senate Majority Leader John Thune offered more than a month ago and Democrats objected to. So yeah, it is worth questioning here. I mean, what was the point of any of this, right? You said that you weren't going to do it without ACA. Now you're doing it without ACA. I mean, we know the point of it. It was to do 2 things. It was to make it look like Chuck Schumer's doing something for the progressives. And then secondly, inflict a bunch of pain so that way they thought it would help them in the elections in November, which it obviously did. But now that that's over, I guess they're just saying, okay, we're stop crying now. By the way, how do they know that the ACA subsidies are going to pass if Republicans hold the Senate? Like, it doesn't actually make a whole lot of logical sense, right? But although most Senate Democrats are likely to oppose this bill, they're resigned to the fact that this part of the fight is over, sources said. And guess what? They lost. They got nothing. Worst negotiators of all time. They will take the battle over healthcare to the midterms and argue that Republicans refuse to do anything for the millions of Americans who will see their health insurance premiums skyrocket. Well, again, as I said last time, that's only going to happen if you just let the tax credits expire and then don't present an alternative solution. But that's exactly why the Trump solution makes perfect sense here, and you should do, right? You should not just keep continuing the status quo on healthcare, but to those 20 million Americans who would see their premiums go up because the corporate socialism through the insurance companies would be defunded, hey, again, give them some type of temporary off-ramp solution, right? And if you do that, and through the process, actually, of getting rid of the subsidies, it would improve the healthcare system. Talk about the argument that Democrats would have then. That's why I've been saying it is politically vital, not just that Republicans let these subsidies expire, but present an alternative solution on healthcare. Trump's plan absolutely needs to pass. Because don't get me wrong, right? They're going to employ the same exact strategy they did with EBT and SNAP in the last elections, which is, hey, you small cohort of Americans, like 20 million who are in the economic working class and you don't have employer-based insurance and your premiums went up. Hey, go vote for the Democrats. Look, you're so angry. Your premiums, all this stuff, right? Disarm that by making sure that doesn't happen. Not by just renewing the ACA credits, but rather by, again, doing what, right? Providing that alternative solution. At least 60 votes are needed to move the bill forward. In the past votes, Senator Rand Paul was the only Republican to vote against the bill, as you could expect, while Democrats Catherine Cortez Masto and John Fetterman, as well as independent Angus King, who I assume is basically a Democrat, voted for it. At least 5 more Democrats would have to vote in favor of the bill to move it forward. Now, passage of the bill would not immediately reopen the government. The House would also have to approve it. I mean, presumably, if it can pass the Senate, it can pass the House, right? The House only needs a majority of votes. Even if some Republicans aren't happy, the Democrats will vote for it. I mean, that's basically going to happen. Now, that said, there you essentially have this aspect of it. Okay, so we'll see what happens. Again, not sure if they're going to follow through, but already you're seeing the backlash from the angry progressives. So this just in, Bernie Sanders is demanding that Democrat senators vote to oppose the proposed deal to end the government shutdown this afternoon, saying, quote, it would be a policy and political disaster for Democrats to cave. I mean, yeah, it's objectively not a good look. Longest shutdown in history. You got nothing out of it. You got nothing. Besides, I guess, the Republicans reversing policies that they weren't proposing to begin with. So maybe the progressives here to an extent do have an argument. At the same time, right? What is this communist lunatic proposing? Oh, for our temper tantrum, let's make sure people don't have Thanksgiving, right? And maybe even, unfortunately, God forbid, planes fall out of the sky. Which has already happened, by the way, in Louisville, Kentucky with a UPS plane, and we don't know necessarily if that was shutdown related, but it's a possibility. And certainly you're operating with big danger here, right? Air traffic controllers are undermanned. We've seen collisions already happen a bunch of times, including the big deadly one in DC, right? A lot of issues here. So yeah, I mean, that's something to keep in mind. That said, you also have Kyle Kulinski, absolutely unhinged progressive commentator, saying, and I quote, this is a cave. Chuck Schumer is caving. Call his office now and say, hold the line and effing resign and let real fighters take over. Put the healthcare subsidies in the effing deal now or Dems vote no.
We just had an election. And in that election, the message was clear. We want you to fight these fuckers. Right now, they're starving 42 million Americans. That's what they're doing. They're also trying to double, triple, and quadruple healthcare premiums. And the best that you're going to get is a promise on a vote in December? Why would you trust them? Why would you trust them? What's the difference between now and December? No, put the subsidies in the bill now. Guarantee the healthcare premiums don't skyrocket now. This is just a total cave. There's no way around it. So what I need you to do, and this is super important, guys, super important. I need you to call Chuck Schumer's office.
So that's essentially what you have here going on. These unhinged people, right? Even though there's going to be a vote later on the healthcare subsidies, and even though these so-called progressives are actually advocating for a system that, first of all, gives a bunch of money to corporations, right, Bernie Sanders, right, Kyle Kulinski? Hey, let's give a bunch of money to big, greedy insurance companies, get paid for by the taxpayer, and simultaneously keep everyone's healthcare premiums high and unaffordable because we're so progressive, we're so amazing. But that basically, these people would like to actually see, as I said, planes falling out of the sky, people harmed, people hurting, just because that way it stops Donald Trump or something. And yeah, these cynical lunatics absolutely did try to inflict pain so that way, the federal workers in Virginia will show up to vote because they're not making freaking money. They're not even feeding themselves, right? The EBT SNAP recipients, they're going to be mad. Make sure they go vote in Virginia and New Jersey. But, there you essentially have it, guys. So we'll see what actually happens. I would not put too much faith in this until it actually does go through. But again, Chuck Schumer looking to cave with absolutely nothing. What a humiliation for the Democrats. That said, let me know your thoughts. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.